Hey, good evening from the Philippines. I'm Johnny Warrior, and this is Thunderbird Outdoor Adventures, and we are talking just bushcraft chit chat. Hey, good evening from the Philippines. I'm Johnny Warrior, and this is. I guess my online is working there. So what I want to do today is look. There's Eric. Baguio Life is on. What I want to do today is on this channel, we talk anything and everything bushcraft, try to answer questions you might have relative to outdoors. I try to get on the live show a little bit more into the herbal medicine side and maybe give you guys some theory and differences. But since it's been so long that I've had a live cast, I thought what I would do is go ahead and really kind of dive into some of the differences that I'm faced with regarding bushcraft or woodcraft here in the Philippines where I reside versus what I'm used to teaching and how it was in the United States. Now, right off the hip, sometimes we're like, well, okay, skill sets are skill sets, right? Well, you're right to a point, to a certain degree. The fundamentals of what primitive technology is, what the core of bushcraft is going to be a theory base that's relevant anywhere we go in the world. Okay. Friction fires are going to work under some basic guidelines of, a softwood hearth and a hardwood spindle, whether you're doing a hand drill or a bow and drill or whatever it is, but there are some, variabilities to that. Here in the Philippines, where really, our wood sources are pretty limited, the best available source of making a friction fire is using bamboo. So things like the bamboo saw is more prevalent. Now, there is a way to use split bamboo to build a drill, and you use a bow and drill. It's pretty excessive in building the drill out of the split bamboo, but it is possible. And the hearth is used off of whatever common softwood is out there, and you're using this. You're recombining all of the split bamboo and using cordage to bind it together, and then just applying pressure. And it's the same way with the friction fires. What is it? Some of the other variabilities that we are confronted with? Well, the biggest is going to be your foraging. All right. Now, just in the United States, going from Texas into the eastern woodlands into the Southwest, we have a lot of differences, but there's always some common denominators and fallbacks that we can use when we're foraging, as well as some fundamental skill sets that we can use in trapping. Snares in rodents are going to work anywhere that you're going, and the fundamentals are still there. Here, where game is pretty limited, the Philippines has pretty much been hunted out. Now, there's wild turkey out there because turkey came domesticated, and a lot of it gets out. Some islands do have hog on there, where domesticated pigs have gone wild. But really, you're not going to be able to eat the monkeys. There's not much in mammalian life, so a lot of it is reptile life, and it's hard to get. So you're kind of stuck using the waterways and fishing and using those type of techniques in order to do your food plans. Now, the biggest one that I am finding is in herbal medicine. Now, nowadays, we're looking forward to spring where, comfrey is going to start blooming. The plantain is going to start coming out. A lot of those common medicinals like yellow dock and the ginseng, goldenrod, all these other things that are where we can count on the spring. None of that is really available here. Now, some of the domesticated products such as ginger and turmeric have grown wild and actually taking root. And in some areas, you're going to be able to find wild ginger and you're going to find wild turmeric, but those are far and few between. It's really in zones that, you know, prolific farming has occurred and it's just gotten out. All right. So it's not going to be up in the mountains of the Sierra Madres or up into the high mountains around Baguio. You're not going to find a lot of that material. So what you need to do is learn a new set of tables and slates in order to get what is indigenous here. Now, there's some right off the top of your head that you're going to be able, you know, there's a wild oregano that it grows here that's very effective towards, you know, they even use that when they're treating dinghy here. Also malungai, which is a tree that's all over the place. It grows wild, but they do have conifers and some trees that are very, very similar to ponderosa pine. So they have the same yellow pine benefits in the medicinals within, you know, the pine needles, having high vitamin C's and nutrient content, as well as a sap being able to be used. And, you know, there's still some nutrient aspects within the underlaying of the bark and stuff like that. So there's a few commonalities, but really I'm faced with just a huge difference in the practice of bushcraft here. Now, the one thing I'm going to say is here, cordage, the ability to make cordage in the field is a lot easier than it is in the United States. There's more vines, more fibrous plants that they have here than we do. Definitely far more than what the Eastern Americanas have. And I'm not saying that that doesn't exist. That is not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that your options here are, you know, all over the place. And, you know, really, you would think in a environment that is so high humid and so moist, it's pretty easy to find materials for tinder and for kindling to build that fire. But you're not going to find a lot of the dead woods and stuff like that that you're gonna find in the United States, where it's easier to maintain that fire. That's one of the issues here is, you know, small fires are what you're going to use. You're not going to use them. Not that, well, there is in the cold months, there is a need for them, but you're not going to find the fuel sources to have those large thermal regulating fires that we have back in the States. So it's been a challenge, you know, a good challenge in learning the differences. It's been a great education. I'm looking forward to being able to put a little bit more of that on the videos in the future. Right now, I'm in the middle of this Survival 101 series for some of the newer guys that have just found the YouTube channel that want a more core basic in bushcraft and survivability. And we're talking about the theory on that. That last video that I just put out was really based on survivability theory, you know, talking about the rules of threes and some of the other fundamentals going into the importance of sheltering, what that encompasses, water, some of those other aspects. I'll have a part 2 of that where I want to really start diving into a few more of the concepts related to, you know, water versus filtered water, some of the things that we need to be concerned about, getting into kitting. And I also want to talk about primitive technologies and, you know, traditional versus modern, and, you know, where that lies. See, I'm of the core belief that when we start talking about primitive technologies, it's the technology base, the fundamental skills of that primitive technology that's key. Now, obviously if you have access to modern materials that are going to enhance that primitive knowledge, you know, I believe that you should be utilizing that. You know, we're not back in the Stone Age because we want to be back in the Stone Age. We've progressed and moved on to that. We've evolved through that. Primitive technologies have evolved through that. That is key, and that's important to really understand how, you know, you evolve through it. You know, you evolve, you and your skills evolve just as we have through time. Baguio Life up there is giving me a recommendation where Baguio Museum is a good place to start anthropologically. You know, if you're really into primitive technologies, if you're really into bushcraft, taking a stance of and taking the time to do your research by visiting museums and visiting local and cultural resources that exhibit those technologies is a game changer when you're building these skill sets, because what you're doing is you're getting a hands-on visual representation of what that primitive technology was back then. And I assure you, if you sat down with that individual from that time, giving him the resources that you have here, they're going to definitely evolve and rush towards the modern resources to ensure that they can still you know, enhance and evolve their primitive skill sets. Now, some examples of what I'm talking about is like, you know, I'm not talking about the use of a lighter when you're starting a fire, because realistically, and the reality is, you know, you're actually going to fail more epically using a Bic lighter in starting a fire than some of the other aspects of primitive fire building or alternative fire building that will give you a higher success rate. And there's a couple factors involved with that. One is just the attention to detail. You know, if you're using a bone drill or a hand drill or even a ferro rod, flint and steel, whatever it is, you're taking the time to make sure that you're maximizing everything so that tinder bundle is dry, is processed, is prepared to take the spark. You have the kindling there available that's dry and sized out properly to where you're going to build that flame up quickly, and you're going to have the split processed woods behind it. Sometimes when we get into like a Bic lighter or whatever, you know, it seems like we throw a little bit of grass in there and then throw some, you know, kindling on there and then expect this raging fire. So we have a tendency to cut corners on a lot of those little fundamental attention to detail factors on some of the basic skill sets. That's why I still utilize a lot of primitive fire building skills. And, you know, I'll use a ferro rod, because a ferro rod, I have to set it up just like I do flint and steel, or even bow and drill. Now, I keep my bow and drill skills up, but when I'm out in the bush in a scenario where I need to build things now, not practice, most likely I am going to be using flint and steel, or I'm going to be using a ferro rod. Very rarely do I use a lighter or matches. I do carry lighters, and I carry 2 lighters with me. You know, one is none and 2 is 1. And then I carry a box of SOS, or a tube of SOS, waterproof container of SOS matches. And those are my absolute, you know, when I have to, or pretty much not the lighters, but the matches. Otherwise, I'm going to go to the ferro rod or a flint and steel. You know, the ferro rod is quick. You know, it produces high temperature sparks. It can get a fire going pretty quick. And flint and steel doesn't take much time at all. You know, that spark on the char cloth and nurture the char cloth in your bird's nest, and it flames up. I do my bow and drill and hand drill skills in you know, around my residence, or if I'm sitting around fireside and I already have a fire going, I will use those skill sets to go. Now, I am a firm believer. The reality of survivability is planning. Okay. You know, the odds are that most often than not, the individual that is using primitive skill sets is falling into either the 72-hour scenario, or is falling into, you know, he's in a self-reliant situation and he or she is trying to extend a non-sustainable resource. Non-sustainable meaning, you know, it's perpetual. Like a ferro rod. Every time you strike a ferro rod, you're taking material off the rod. So that means it has a set lifespan. It's not a sustainable item. So sometimes what we'll do is we'll alternate using some of these primitive skill sets that are a little bit more sustainable, such as a bow and drill or a hand drill, in order to extend those resources when we're in a self-reliant situation. Now, the 72-hour scenario, more often than not, this is when, you know, an individual is out camping, hiking, whatever. You would think that individuals have a plan set of resources available to them in the event of getting lost or having to shelter in because of weather or whatever that scenario may be. So if it's a situation that they have piss poor planning and they're unable to, you know, get that utilize resources that they packed in, well, that's why I'm doing the survivability courses, so that they understand what they need to do for kitting. Look, a survival kit does not need to be a huge pouch, okay? But at the same time, this Altoid 10 survival kit concept, I mean, the novelty is great. You know, I have some commercial, some serious commercial survival kits that I use as fail-safe. That's part of a pocket EDC plan that I do when I'm out and about. But the reality is my primary survival kit is my Bushcraft kit. It is my pack. So the skills that I use, the things that I use, the knives, cooking tins, the containers, the filtration devices, my fire skills, my sheltering, everything that I use while I am hiking or camping is exactly the same thing that I would use in a self-reliant or in a emergency situation. Now, I may add a few things to that. For instance, in my sheltering kit, I am a hammock camper. So I have a Eno that has a built-in bug net, and then I have an Eno ProFly rain fly that I use, and that is my shelter. I do carry some space blankets that I can actually utilize for thermal reflection, because I can't place a fire close to my setup. And I happen to predominantly do outdoors in the Philippines, where I'm not really too concerned about extreme thermal situations, because I'm packing the appropriate layering materials that I need to be able to thermal regulate. You know, yes, can you get hypothermia in the Philippines or in a tropical environment? Hell yeah. You know, it could be 85 degrees down here in the valleys when I start hiking up a hill, and it'll drop a good 10, 15 degrees by the time I get, you know, halfway to up on the mountain. And then let's say that the storms come in, these tropical moisture storms that build around these mountain chains pour really, really cold water down on you. So, you know, if you get soaked by cold water with an extreme temperature change, you get wind, you're going to be in a situation to where you are going to have thermal regulation issues. So that's what, you know, having a plan in place where you are able to use layering techniques and, you know, sheltering techniques to regulate that. So some of those things are, you know, that things are not as in some ways things aren't much different, but in other ways they're extremely different. Now in February, I'm heading back to the States, and you know, I don't know, Oklahoma. That February is in the heart of the ice storms and snowstorms and everything like that, and I doubt I'm going to get any outside time. I might be able to do a couple day hikes, and I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to do some photo footage, and there's a part of me that misses that, you know, the woodlands, you know, doing a lot of this in the woodlands. But there's a lot of opportunity here to see it from a whole different perspective, from, you know, seaside, right? High tropical mountains, the tropical lowlands, you know, delta basins. There's a whole avenue of environments that we're being faced with here that has its own set of challenges. My biggest hurdle that I'm finding, and especially if you guys are you know, doing a lot of this primitive skill sets abroad outside of your home country, you know, most of us, when we talk about primitive bushcraft and primitive skill sets, we're residing either in Europe or we're residing in the United States. Now, there's a growing bushcraft community here in the Philippines. You know, it's very popular here as well. I don't know what those influences are. I think a lot of that has to do with the Ate. They were used by U.S. military in order to teach jungle warfare and jungle survival. That's who I took my jungle warfare and my jungle survival schools with back in the day. And they're still there. They're still teaching these. You know, they're still Jest is still open down there in Subic Bay, and they're still teaching the courses and the courseworks available, just as they did to the Marines and units that were running through back in the 80s and 90s. So, you know, they're still kicking it pretty good. So I'm wondering if maybe that had a lot of the influence with some of these guys growing up around that, and that really touched base. You know, Filipinos have this knife culture, right? And I think in a way that has a little bit to do with it as well. The outdoor sector does, because it's so closely associated when we talk about knife technologies. You know, there's the tactical side and then there's the outdoor side, and that seems to be the two prominent markets that grow, and you'll see both of those here, both being represented here in the Philippines very, very prolifically. All right, guys, I wanted to make this short. Was hoping to get a little bit more conversation, but I hope the babble that I continue to have gave you guys something to think about. And I'm going to try to do these on Sunday on a regular basis so that we can start having some dialogue and having conversation. Now, I am going to close this with one thing. We talked a little bit about, you know, spring coming up with the emergence of a lot of herbal medicines. And one of these herbal medicines that are coming up, and this is in North America, and it's a medicinal called comfrey. All right. And I challenge you guys to investigate aspects of this particular plant. Now, the root and the leaf itself is what's used. The dried comfrey root, leaf. Now, the comfrey leaf is used a lot in poultices, and the comfrey root itself is used in, dried comfrey root is used in salves. That's the diminishing part. But both of them are used prolifically with muscle trauma, you know, bruising, sprains, strains, etc. They're extremely effective with that. There has been a series of old medicinal practices used in using comfrey tincture as a means of detoxification in the liver. I'm not sure I would. Comfrey is a very hot, a very strong, and can become toxic. So using it as a detoxifier, I'm not sure. I think there's other things out there that are more mild that would be better situated in being used as a liver detoxifier, blood detoxifier. But, you know, comfrey was used in that means. But it is epic when we're talking about muscle trauma, muscle bruising, strains, sprains, twists, you know, all of that. It's very, very effective. Now, a poultice is using a, you know, you take a very, very hot towel, taking the fresh leaves, wrapping it up in the hot towel, and applying it directly onto the area that you're going to treat. When we're talking about the salve, what we're doing is we're using oils and beeswax in order to seat the constituents. Well, the beeswax what firms up the salve, but you're using an oil, generally something like olive oil. And I usually put the comfrey root in olive oil in a very low setting in a crock pot for a long duration and allow it to steep. And then it'll extract the constituents. And I use that olive oil as my base for a salve that can be applied for the muscle trauma. Now, I challenge you to do some research on this. There's more than enough. Guys, you don't need to go out there and buy expensive books on medicinal herbs anymore. There's so much information out there in both the blogs and a lot of these platforms. The American Herbal Association, they have a lot of resources that you can use. There's a couple learning herbs. All right. There's a guy by the name of John that has a company called Learning Herbs. They have a blog. Mountain Rose has a back-end blog that they talk about the utilization of medicinal herbs. And these are good starting points to where you can start getting into some key learning avenues and really start using these types of natural healing agents to, you know, cure yourself or heal yourself rather than taking, you know, the pills and over. I mean, we pop a couple ibuprofen and don't think about it, but there's a lot of strain on the body when we start using those type of chemicals in our system. When we start using natural herbs, what we're doing is a lot of these medicines, these pharmaceuticals, yes, they have a place based in botany. You know, most of them come from a botanical presence. But what they do is they lose their balance when they start to isolate the particular constituent that they want, and they try to chemically enhance it or chemically reproduce it, re-engineer it, and then they come out with this altered constituent that's so isolated. But when we're talking about plant material, organic material, it balances. So you're getting a balance of the constituent that's targeting as well as things that are enhancing it and balancing it. So you get a more overall effect when we're talking about natural medicines or herbal medicines. All right, food for thought, guys. So I challenge you to go out there and research comfrey and its uses and see if it's got anything that you could utilize. You know, for us here in the Philippines, it's hard to get a hold of some of this stuff. It's not impossible, but it's a little difficult. But this is one agent that I really think plant that I really think that the research and I being able to identify it and being able to utilize it effectively would be a asset to you, a benefit to you. All right, guys, until next time, you know, I hope everything's good to go and get out there and get some dirt time. Okay, See you later.